Leslie Stern opens Meditation on Violence with a provocation. The blood is leached from Raging Bull, and yet it comes to us red hot. Too hot to handle, she writes on page 11. Now, what makes a film red hot? For Stern, the answer runs through editing, through the way montage doesn't simply show a body in motion, but produces the sensation of that motion in the viewer. It makes us feel what we're only watching. Her chapter here showcases a framework for understanding how cinema does this, and it moves through 4 interlocking concepts. Let's dive into them. To begin, drawing on the work of performance theorist Eugenio Barba, Stern distinguishes between what is known as the daily body and the performing body, also referred to as the decided body. The daily body is habitual. Its techniques are profoundly cultural, but usually learned and acted out on an unconscious and habitual level. It is the body moving through the world on autopilot, unremarkable and invisible to itself. The performing body is something else. Barba, as Stern quotes him, describes a body that performs by virtue of training, discipline, yet in the act of performing, it appears as possessed, almost as an involuntary presence. It's a body that looks compelled, like something has taken over. But what triggers that takeover? Stern's answer is what she refers to as the totemic object. Drawing on Freud's totem and taboo, she argues that certain objects in cinema exceed their function. They are ordinary objects invested with extraordinary qualities that summon a context of ritual, of ceremony, of theater, a context realized in sharp opposition to the everyday. And so, the totemic object is the switch. But there's a cost, because, as Stern writes, to possess these objects is to be possessed. And the object, in turn, requires a certain space. This is what is referred to as the arena. Stern writes that the totemic object indicates an arena of performance, an arena in which the ordinary body is transformed. For an audience, the body is ceremonialized. Thus, the arena is not just a location. It's a ceremonial space defined by its opposition to the everyday, and it's through montage that cinema builds this space for us as viewers. Stern is explicit about this. The ecstasy of the performance sequencing in Raging Bull and The Red Shoes, she writes, comes not from the content, but from the cinematic rendering of obsession. This rendering, she argues, involves a rhythm and timing partly affected through editing, but also through slight variations of camera speed. Hence, the cut is not a neutral tool, but a defining characteristic that constitutes the arena for the audience. And finally, that arena does not hold. Performance energy is excessive, and it exceeds the ceremonial space and floods into the everyday. The result, Stern writes, is a demonstrable excess. Energy that is not contained by the performance arena is transformed differently in the quotidian. Ecstasy is repeated, but with ruinous reverberations. This is the framework for our analysis today, and Stern showcases how it's applied across 2 films, Raging Bull and The Red Shoes. Now, for the sake of time, let's look at the first, before asking what happens when this logic is applied somewhere far stranger. Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull, released in 1980, is a black and white biographical film about Jake LaMotta, a middleweight boxer from the Bronx whose obsessive drive to become champion gradually destroys every relationship in his life. It is, as Stern puts it, a fiction about a man who lives in order to fight, and it is the film around which Stern builds the most detailed parallels with her analytical framework. Jake's totemic objects are his boxing gloves. Stern writes, it is not simply as functional and denotative objects that they exist, but as totemic. The moment they go on, the performing body takes over, and Scorsese's editing is what makes that transformation physically felt by the viewer. Stern is precise about how the extreme slow motion, the sound dropping out mid-fight, the editing choices, she argues, serve to render Jake's opponents in a heightened, almost imperceivably transfigured way. The cinematic effect functions like an act of will, a theatricalization of desire. Hence, through the edit, we are pulled inside Jake's obsessive perception of the ring. And so it can be said that the arena is built out of cuts, and the former fails to contain him. Jake's performing body bleeds into his marriage in how his ring obsession becomes domestic violence and jealousy. And so, the energy of the arena disperses into the everyday. Stern calls this the structural drama of the film, in how the performing body's decisiveness carried over into the daily becomes a catastrophic indecision or inability to contain a compulsive and deadly drive. Therefore, Raging Bull establishes a clear example of this framework within a working filmic example. Now, let's ask what happens when the same logic is transposed onto an entirely different but more eerie context. Twin Peaks is a television series created by David Lynch and Mark Frost, which aired on ABC between 1990 and 1991. It follows FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, who arrives in the small town of Twin Peaks, Washington, to investigate the murder of local homecoming queen Laura Palmer. Over 2 seasons, Cooper's investigation becomes something more than professional. It becomes a consuming obsession, one that eventually draws him towards a place the show calls the Black Lodge, a supernatural space existing in the boundaries between worlds, accessible only through a ring of sycamore trees in Ghostwood Forest. The Season 2 finale, Beyond Life and Death, is the episode we're concerned with here. In it, Cooper enters the Black Lodge to rescue Annie Blackburn from the villainous Wyndham Earl. What follows is the most formally radical editing sequence in the series that takes every concept of Stern's framework to its most extreme and literal conclusion. In Beyond Life and Death, the totemic object is undoubtedly the sycamore tree, or more precisely, the ring of sycamore trees that marks the threshold of the Black Lodge. Like the boxing gloves, the sycamore tree is an ordinary object invested with extraordinary qualities. It marks the spot where the daily world ends and the arena begins. Cooper must pass through it to enter the lodge, and it is the last image Lynch cuts to before Cooper emerges from the lodge for the final time. That editorial decision is the argument here. Lynch does not show us Cooper walking out of the lodge, but rather cuts to the sycamore tree, conveniently spotlighted in front of the bright red curtains, and then eventually cuts again to Cooper back into the everyday world. The tree essentially bookmarks the arena. Its purposeful placement at the opening and closing of the lodge sequence is a montage choice, and it is through that very choice that an ordinary tree becomes what Stern calls an ordinary object invested with extraordinary qualities. In other words, the sycamore tree is a marker that separates the daily from the ceremonial. The sycamore tree is not symbolic in isolation. It's a montage effect. Put it somewhere else in the edit and it means nothing. Place it here as threshold, as frame, as the first and last image before cutting out of or cutting back to the real world, and it becomes what Stern labels totemic. The Black Lodge is the arena, and once again, Lynch builds it entirely through montage. What makes the lodge so disturbing is not its visual design alone. It's the way the cuts refuse the logic of physical space. Characters disappear between shot transitions. Cooper moves through curtained doorways and arrives in rooms he's seemingly already left. He travels what appears to be forward and ends up back where he started, with the same red curtains and the same chevron floors. The lodge is spatially unmappable, and it is unmappable because of the edit. Lynch made a deliberate choice in the editing room. He did not show characters walking out of rooms. He cuts, and they are elsewhere, or nowhere, or back again for that matter. This is exactly what Stern describes when she writes about the montage capacity to produce a vertiginous experience of space-time. Not a time and space, but space-time, obviously created by the edit itself. If Lynch had respected continuity editing, if he had shown Cooper physically crossing from room to room, the lodge would be eerie but navigable. It is the sequence of cuts, the refusal of spatial logic across shot transitions, that transforms it into a ceremonial arena, or as Stern writes, a context realized in sharp opposition to the everyday. Furthermore, Beyond Life and Death offers a uniquely literal version of Stern's daily performing body split, because it gives us 2 physical Coopers. At the start of the lodge sequence, we have the daily body Cooper, coffee-loving and procedural, trying to make sense of the impossible space around him. But as the sequence progresses, the edit gradually introduces a second figure, Cooper's doppelganger, or else known as Mr. C. The shift in bodies is performed through a careful sequencing of shots. Early in the lodge's sequence, Cooper is alone, and as the cuts accumulate, the doppelganger begins appearing more frequently, following Cooper through the red-curtained hallways, walking alongside figures like Leland Palmer, and laughing with the spirit of Bob. The performing body accretes at the edges of the frame, shot by shot, until by the very end of the sequence, it is the doppelganger who is dominant, who exists in the lodge, and who eventually, spoiler alert, returns to the world, while Daily Cooper is left behind, trapped inside the arena. This is Montage performing the very transformation Stern describes, the paradox of a performing body that appears as possessed, almost as an involuntary presence, introduced through the careful order of cuts. The edit does not tell us exactly when the performing body takes over, but rather shows us gradually through accumulation. Consequently, by the time the audience registers what has happened, it already has. And then, as in The Ring and Raging Bull, the lodge fails to contain what it has created. In the episode's final scene, Cooper, or what appears to be Cooper, stands at his bathroom mirror in his Great Northern Hotel room. In this closing scene, he drives his face into the glass, and what follows is a single cut, from the frontal shot of the doppelganger smashing towards the camera to a 3/4 medium profile shot, and in the cracked mirror's reflection, staring back, is not Cooper's face, but that of Bob's. Bob, being the spirit of pure evil that killed Laura Palmer, now inhabits Cooper's doppelganger. In other words, the arena has followed Cooper home. That cut is everything. It's not a gradual reveal like in the switch of bodies. It's a hard cut from one shot to the next, and it produces, in a single montage transition, the full weight of what we've been looking at with the bleeding out of the arena into the everyday life. In Raging Bull, this bleeding out is metaphorical. Jake's violence in the ring becomes domestic violence. However, in Beyond Life and Death, it is uniquely literal and metaphysical at once. See, the performing body cuts out of the arena wearing the daily body's face, and a single cut is what makes us see it. Stern writes that montage, at its most dangerous, can articulate a death threat, enact a death drive. That is precisely what this cut does, and the brilliance is that the arena's excess is made visible in one particular image, delivered by one singular defining cut to end off the series and leave audiences with the greatest question mark yet. Stern ends her chapter by turning the framework back on us. Going to the movies itself, she writes, is an event, a way of ceremonializing. And so the arena can't be understood as only the content on screen because the edit pulls us into it. We are, in her own words, infected by coming into contact with the ecstasy, by touching what is red hot. Raging Bull confirms this framework, and Beyond Life and Death can be seen as taking these ideas to their very limit. One where the performing body takes over the arena entirely, and where the cut to a cracked mirror is the last thing we see, and where what looks back at us is no longer what went in. And the montage, as we've been looking at all along, is how we feel it. Thank you so very much for your attention. Here is my works cited.